I set my rules, I set up my roles, I set up the access, I set up how the budgets and plans are going to be effective within the cloud-based environment. And
when
now,
you say you do, what you're really referring to is you can go to the individual stakeholders within an organization, like a chief service officer, a chief sales officer, a chief marketing officer, and integrate kind of those businesses with the IT in order to kind of automate a process so that in the future, that amount of upfront labor and expense is not there. That's really what we're talking about.
Exactly. So once you've done it the first time to actually get into the cloud itself, you keep that same methodology and you repeat it, right? But if you can turn it into a tooling situation that allows you to integrate those same rules into the future growth, now you're covering future growth plus the 1/3. So now you're starting to help them to actually evolve and expand, right? And I think that's where a lot of the risk. So you asked a little bit about the risk specifically, right? So for some of the risk, if my team is already at volume because I'm the customer and my customer's engineering team or deployment teams are already at volume.
Which they have to be almost all the time. No one's got people sitting around these days.
Exactly. A bench costs money. So in order to be truly effective, you're going to have them utilized. If your team is then supporting the lower tier of your technology, meaning your development or your, right, so the lower, not your production, not your true revenue generating, but the lower tiers, it starts to add complexity. The project still needs to be planned. The project still needs to be managed. The timeline still needs to be understood. How to bucket these migrations and configurations and families. So by removing that and putting it into the cloud, you no longer have to refresh that asset in the same capacity. You're now alleviating potential risk on your original team to be able to focus on your revenue generating assets. And so that's a lot of what we see.
So let's talk about that for a second, because I found it interesting as a business owner. I've got, X number of engineers. And those engineers have certain skill sets, and there are certain things where they in theory are overqualified, or I'd get, better use of those resources doing something else for production. Totally get it. 100% no brainer. How do I know and feel confident though that those other applications and that other workload is going to be handled appropriately, unless there's kind of a long-term relationship with a trusted VAR? How do you overcome that? How do you start that engagement? How do you kind of do a proof of concept? Or do you test the waters?
Let's answer the first half of that question by use case. Large size enterprise is paying for rough order of magnitude 30% of additional physical capacity in the technology to be sitting and waiting to be used. So normally at 70% utilization, you would buy more. So there's almost always 30% of capacity that is just standby. That's an immediate savings. But remember, that 30% capacity still needs to be refreshed every 3 years, right? If it's a 3-year refresh policy.
So it's total waste.
Absolutely, and it's a compounding waste that's causing issue. The same team that's supporting your revenue generating top line is the team that's still supporting that compounding waste that's at the bottom. So why are you overburdening them and compounding your risk? So that's from an enterprise perspective as an answer. Let's go over to the mid-size organization. The mid-size to small-size organization, from a CFO's perspective, right, they're right now having to look to slim their teams. They're looking at trying to not have to pay for a $200,000 resource or extraordinarily expensive resource that carries all types of certification across all of these technologies. And so in order to avoid that cost, usually you're dealing with a different person or persona on the other side of the table. Their concerns, especially in these cloud environments, are to be able to have security within the space, right? Security that they're making the right decisions. Although they might not be a technological person, they might be focused on the CMO side or the CFO side, so looking at it very financially. This leads us into the answer for yourself on really what is the best way to ensure that we are the people that know how to get this done. If I don't have an IT team and I tell you moving to the cloud is going to save you a bunch of money, you're going to be great. But what my real concern is that my end user isn't affected. My end user's experience can't change because I don't have a tech team to actually run out there and work with that end user's experience. So mid-sized organization, very micro-focused on the individual, the singular, and I tend to call it a transactional kind of approach. Rather than being hugely consultative, on zooming into the application and the app. You don't have somebody to talk to about the technology. You have somebody to talk to about the individual user's experience. So first, your partner, or having a partner in there, has to be able to work on multiple tiers. They have to be able to consult with the technical team if there is one. They have to be able to deal with making sure that if there isn't one and there's another persona, that they understand the same information coming back to them, right? So a CFO would want the financial aspect. They'd want to know that the legal side of it is covered, right? A CMO would want to know how it's going to advance their organization and help them to stay on track with their brand and other components that are very important to that CMO side of the fence. So again, a partner has to be able to understand and help them to reverse, because when it comes down to it, I'm still deploying for that company. We are still deploying those servers for that company. And I still have to report to that CFO on the success or failure of that implementation. Even though they're not a technical person, they still need to understand it's going down that path and being successful. So I would look for partners that have worked with small to mid-sized organizations and enterprises and can talk consultatively, transactionally, and then furthermore, their internal IT, their internal operations teams have actually proven themselves within this space, which is why it's a huge value add to take this down the path of orchestration, because once you've done this one way, being able to repeat the model, that's the key, right? So doing it one way, knowing that someone can do it, that comes with a successful use case and a good customer's recommendation, right? BCM1 has deployed my virtualized environment. They've given me a hybrid design. They put me into a co-location and into the cloud, created interoperability between all of my offices, and I was able to decommission my data center. Awesome, great story. But have they done that to small, mediums, and larges? And have they been able to talk the talk of, look, there was only a CFO that was involved with this opportunity. Their CTO had left the company. Their engineering team was only one person, and he got sick and was unable to continue working for the company, or whatever the circumstance might be. That's what I would look for as far as a partner and a value add. Once you do it the first time, repeating it is truly the key. Being able to take that logic, apply it to a centralized means of orchestration so that that CFO can continue to repeat, deploy, or grow their business under the exact same roles, responsibilities, groups, policies, and budgets that were just forecasted in the original effort. Does that make sense?
It does, but you know, it brings up another point, which I think is really important, because you were going back and forth between whether they're partnering and do it themselves. Just as it relates to the partner community at large, the traditional telecom partner is predisposed to waive NRCs for their clients.
Yeah.
And I'd asked, you know, the earlier question was kind of a leading question, because one of the things that popped into my head is, if I'm, you know, CFO, CEO, or CIO, it's like, I really have to feel 100% confident that the entity that's going to move those workloads or orchestrate that, or plan and design it, is actually going to be able to execute on that, you know, excellently.
Absolutely.
So I would be very hesitant to not do that without a statement of work, okay, without a fee associated with it, because, you know, in theory, if you're not paying for it, you know, if it doesn't work, don't be surprised, that type of thing. So I think that this is going to be a change for the traditional telecom partner. Obviously, the IT VAR, they're charging ProServe, and their revenue has historically been derived from selling hardware and the ProServe around hardware. So I think that's an interesting dynamic as it plays out. Something else that I think is critically important with this is, okay, what is the partner responsible for? What am I responsible for? And truly documenting that very granularly, okay, and tying it to the business outcome that you're looking for, because inevitably something's going to be left out, or something's going to be different than was initially thought. So the client might say, okay, yes, I have the skill set to do this internally, and once they get into the project, it becomes, wow, you know, right now I don't have the necessary skill set. I need help, or I can't do it within the time frame, or it's going to drag things out, or whatever it might be. Or, you know, something in a production environment or business-wise might pop up, and all of a sudden those resources need to be allocated to someone else. So there needs to be the ability to just scale and fill in. But I think the big problem lies in, if that's not clearly laid out with at least, okay, if you were going to do it as a client, and now it's going to move over to, you know, someone else doing it, what's the fee structure associated with that, so that at the end of the day, it's not perceived as potentially a bait and switch or something like that. So I think that that's something important from the sales distribution space. Something else that popped into my head is, I think I see from a lot of sellers, they go very vertical very quickly with the client, and they get caught in speaking about the individual specifics about a particular application, and that technical person within the client really knows that deeply, and they're talking about how do I do a particular task, as opposed to the concept of kind of architecting an overall solution up front, because the idea here and what we're talking about is really allocating the resources in the best manner for an organization, and being able to figure out where that decision maker, again, whether it's a CMO, chief sales officer, or a CIO or CFO, where they want to, where their priorities are and where they want to use those resources.